Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be talking about a topic that often gets looked over but is crucial for every DevOps engineer working in the cloud: security groups. Now, most folks zero in on port configurations, but there's much more to consider. Ports are everywhere, in airports, coffee shops, the cloud, and even in our homes. These ports serve as a crucial access point, allowing communications and connections to flow. So each switch you see in your house is an opportunity for a hacker to take over your network. And with a small tool like this ShackJack from Hack5, you can just plug it into the port, and within seconds, a Slack notification will be sent to the hacker containing all the network information they need. I'm sure you might be wondering, how do I protect myself from this? This ain't no rocket science. I'll be breaking this down for you as simple as possible, starting with what security groups are exactly. What are security groups? I literally think of them as virtual firewalls that control inbound and outbound traffic to my resources. They are key players in maintaining our cloud environment's security posture. Just like whenever you want to get into a new country, border security goes through your luggages to make sure you have no cocaine, no illegal substances. Security groups serve as rules set in place advising who can and cannot access my specific network or application. The downside is a lot of engineers tend to zero in only on ports when setting up security groups. Ports such as port 22, port 80, port 443, port 25, port 3306, and a lot more. While it's crucial to know which ports should be open, that's just scratching the surface of it all. Ignoring other important factors can leave your system exposed to significant vulnerabilities. So what I'm going to do is I'll touch base on some few important aspects that I believe every DevOps engineer should master. Let's kick things off with port scanning techniques. Tools like Nmap are your best friends here. They help you identify open ports and the services running on those ports. Now, attackers often use methods like sync scans or UDP scans to gather intel on your network. By familiarizing yourself with these techniques, you can bluster yourself from unauthorized scans. For instance, setting up intrusion detection systems that can alert you whenever someone is probing your ports. It's all about staying one step ahead of the savages. Next up, having an idea of common vulnerabilities and how to stop them is very important. Every service listening on a port has its own weaknesses. Take Telnet on port 23 for example. It's notoriously insecure and should be avoided at all costs. Then there's SMB on port 445, which has been tied to major attacks like the WannaCry. By knowing which port carries what vulnerability, you can prioritize your security measures and focus on the most at-risk services. Moving on, let's clarify the difference between dynamic ports and well-known ports. Well-known ports, which usually ranges between 0 to 1023, are used by standard protocols. Think of HTTP running on port 80. On the other hand, dynamic ports usually above 49,152 are employed by applications to create temporary connections. For example, when your browser connects to a web server, it might use a dynamic port to facilitate that connection. Understanding this distinction helps you to manage your network traffic more efficiently. Now, let's dive into port forwarding and network address translations, which we call NAT gateways. Port forwarding is essential for allowing external devices to access services in your internal network securely. For instance, if you have a web service running on port 8080 in your home network, you might want to forward that port to let users access it outside. This practice is common in both home networks and enterprise environments, balancing security with the need for access. And we can't talk about all of this without talking about firewall rules and port management. If your firewall rules are too permissive, you'll be leaving the door open for attackers. So it's important to use the principle of less privilege when setting up your firewalls, meaning only the desired traffic should be going to your service. If your service doesn't need a port like HTTP, then do not use HTTP. If your service doesn't need a port like SSH, then avoid opening the port 22 for SSH. Now, if you've been watching the video to this point, I bet you it's going to get more interesting. So I want to spend some time talking on cloud-based port security, so stay with me. Now, let's just say you're running a Docker container on an EC2 instance, or you're running an EKS cluster. It's important to go to the security group and restrict the IP ranges for different IPs. It could be your work IP, it could be the employee's IP, it could be the VPC or any other range, but never let traffic from everywhere get into your services. It's not just about TCP and UDP. Always understand what protocols your application is using and restrict traffic accordingly. For example, if your application only requires HTTP access on port 80, don't open other ports like FTP or ICMP that could be exploited. This minimizes attack vectors. One common practice I try to implement is to keep track of what resources are attached to what security group. Misconfigurations could sometimes lead to unintended access. Let's just say, for example, your security group is meant for a web-facing application and you attach that to your RDS. You're basically giving public access to your database. I always try to set up login to capture any traffic that gets through. This helps me identify potential threats. For example, with the use of AWS CloudTrail or VPC flow logs, I always monitor access patterns, and if I notice any repeated access attempts from an unusual location, then I investigate further. And hence, I encourage my team to run random security group configuration audits. With the use of tools like Vanter, I get alerted whenever there's a port open which shouldn't be open. You know what? Let's touch base on this real-world security breach that shows you the importance of having a good port security in place. Back in 2017, an incident involving a major healthcare provider called Anthem Inc. occurred. They suffered a significant data breach due to misconfigured security settings. They had an S3 bucket that was publicly accessible, allowing everyone to have access to sensitive patients' data. The bucket contained over 3 million records, including personal information, medical history, and more. This oversight led to massive data leak, affecting countless individuals and costing the company millions in fines and a reputation damage. Another glaring example is the infamous Target breach in 2013. Hackers gained access to Target's network through a third-party vendor, and once inside, they exploited misconfigured firewalls and security groups to move laterally across the network, ultimately stealing credit card information for over 40 million customers. These breaches serve as a stark reminder that security groups are not just about opening and closing ports. They represent the front line of defense in our cloud environment. In hope of not making this video too long, I'll touch base on 6 best practices and then we can wrap up the video. Number 1. Use the least privilege principle. Always follow principles of least privilege. This means you should only allow traffic that's absolutely necessary for your application to function. For example, if your web application only needs to communicate via port 80 for HTTP traffic, then you shouldn't be opening other ports like FTP or SSH. Number 2. Implement multi-factor authentication. MFA adds an additional layer of security. Even if an attacker manages to obtain your password, they won't be able to access your resources without the second factor, which could be a text message or authentication app code. Make it a practice of enforcing MFA for all users, especially those with access to critical systems. Number 3, educate your team on security practices. Security isn't just a responsibility of a few IT folks, it's a team effort. Regularly educate your team about security best practices, phishing threats, and proper use of security groups. Conduct training sessions and simulate scenarios to keep everyone alert. This collective awareness will help build a robust security culture within your organization. Number 4, leverage logging and monitoring tools. Implement logging and monitoring solutions to track access and changes to your security group. Tools like AWS CloudTrail or Azure Monitor can provide insight into who accessed what at what time. This visibility will help you spot unusual patterns that may indicate a breach or misconfiguration. Number 5, use tagging for your organizations. Utilize tagging to categorize your security group based on purpose, environment, or ownership. This will make sure that it's easy to manage and review permissions, especially in larger organizations. Tags can also aid in reporting and compliance efforts, helping you to quickly identify security groups that may need attention. Number 6, limit access to security groups. It's important to restrict who can modify your security group rules. Only allow access to trusted team members and use role-based access control to enforce this. This reduces the risk of accidental changes that could expose your infrastructure to threats. Of course, there are plenty more practices we could talk about. However, to avoid overwhelming you with too much information at once, we'll save the rest for another video. Remember, security groups are just one part of the large security strategy in the cloud. By considering the bigger picture and not just focusing on ports, you can significantly improve your security posture. If you found this video helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more DevOps insights. Drop your questions or experience with security groups in the comments below. And until next time, stay secure. Cheers.